What if I told you that Seek of the Mimic tells us where it and one of the most mysterious minigames in FNAF takes place, and it's not Hurricane, Utah? Welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy's theory, and today we're using a piece of evidence that most people probably walked right over without giving it a second thought to determine where the MCM facility is. Now first, why exactly would knowing where this game takes place in particular suddenly be revolutionary information? Well, as most of you probably know, most of the games are said to take place in Hurricane, Utah. Originally, we got this information back in the Silverized trilogy, as we did with a lot of information about FNAF back in 2015, but then it sort of gets re-established in AR and an unused Faz Fact. But of course, this line and the other unused Faz Facts were cut for a good reason, so this might not be the most reliable source we have for the games. However, it is also stated on the legal documents in Pizzeria Simulator when you're getting sued that we are located in Washington County, Utah. And guess what city is in Washington County? That's right, Hurricane. So it's pretty safe to say that most of the games, if not all of them up to this point, take place in Hurricane, Utah. And most of you probably already know that. It's one of the few facts we actually get in FNAF. Except this time, I don't think it's a fact. I think the game is specifically trying to tell us that we're not in Hurricane anymore.
Rosie? I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
So again, why exactly would this be revolutionary information? Well, I'm definitely not saying that they're rewriting the entire timeline in order to be in a new location, if that's what you think I'm saying. No, I'm just specifically saying that MCM is in a different location, that they aren't in Hurricane. Heck, I don't even think they're in Utah. And if that's the case, then it seems odd for them to, after 10 plus years of this game franchise, to finally change the location. It feels like it would have some sort of significance to it, right? First, I should probably talk about what makes me think we're not in Hurricane and where we actually are in the games, right? Well, it all starts within the first 10 seconds of the game when we're talking to dispatch and they tell us that we're the only technician in the area.
Awesome to hear. Well, listen, we need you to take one more shift for us, since you're our closest technician in the area.
Even after working a 36-hour shift, because we are the closest technician in the area, we are still sent on this suicide mission. Now, I know this is supposed to just be played as a joke, but if we're truly in Hurricane, Utah, where all the other games are taking place, why exactly is Arnold the only one in the area to be able to do this job? Wouldn't it make sense for Fazbear Entertainment to have some sort of headquarters in the area where contractors and technicians can come in and collect assignments, special tools for jobs, paychecks, and even company vans in order to go to specific locations? And it's not like Arnold is some fresh meat that Fazbear Entertainment is just giving the worst jobs in order to try and get him to quit. No, he's been there for a few years, because in his van, we can find a paper saying that he's certified by Fazbear Entertainment for the year 1979. And we can find a few more of these papers stuffed into his passenger side sun visor. Now, of course, you may be thinking that I'm overanalyzing these small details, as I normally do in these games, but when you look in the files, you can actually find a different take of the conversation between Arnold and Dispatch. After taking the alternate voice lines and putting them in the correct order, we hear Arnold talk about how it's going to take him at least another 2 hours before he reaches MCM.
Murray's is another 2-hour drive. I gotta pull over and take a nap or get some more coffee first.
Not to worry, here's some company-approved music to keep you engaged while you drive.
Now, I don't live in Utah, and I'm sure most of you don't either, but after quickly looking it up, I found that Hurricane is actually really close to the state border. A quick 45-minute drive can get you across it, and within a 2-hour drive, you can either get to Las Vegas or the Grand Canyon, depending on which direction you leave Hurricane. So when Arnold tells dispatch that he's at least another 2 hours before he reaches the MCM facility, and he's nowhere close enough to home for anyone else to take the job from him, you can bet that he's far from Hurricane when he gets there. Now, many of you might still be saying that we have to be in Hurricane still, since the MCM facility eventually becomes the Pizzaplex, right? I've heard this theory from many different people, since it would be so easy to turn those underground tunnels into what we see in Ruin, Security Breach, or heck, even Sister Location. We even see a bunch of things from Security Breach or Ruin that feel like they were pulled straight from the MCM facility. The weird wooden rooms at the end of Ruin feel like they were built for MCM. The giant Freddy head at the end of Security Breach is being constructed underneath MCM. The costumes that we find in the room with the Mimic at the end of Ruin are pulled straight from Secret of the Mimic. And in the game Secret of the Mimic, you can find a picture of David on a hill next to the Mimic underneath a tree, similar to 3 of the endings from Security Breach and Ruin, where we see Gregory on a hill sitting under a tree, sitting next to different characters. But if Secret of the Mimic truly takes place in the same location as Security Breach, why do we see a van taking the Mexus machine away in Help Wanted 2? Fazbear Entertainment comes to pick up that machine in order to move it to a different location. And if that's the case, then that means that we are not in the same location as Security Breach. And honestly, I feel like most of the reasons I just gave as to why this would be in the same location have some pretty easy explanations to them. The hill that we see is symbolic, so it doesn't actually have to be the same hill, it just has to be a hill with a tree at the top. The Freddy head that we see can either be moved or it can be remade from whenever it was made in the 70s. And the costumes that we see with the Mimic can also be moved when the Mimic is moved, because let's face it, the Mimic has some sort of work done between Secret of the Mimic and Security Breach, so somebody has to have interacted with it since then. The only thing that I really can't explain are those weird rooms and stairwells that we see at the end of Ruin that just feel like MCM. Either Fazbear Entertainment built on top of another building that we just don't know about yet or don't recognize yet, or somebody built these rooms and stairwells to look a lot like MCM in order to confuse the Mimic, and neither of these explanations sound good to me. So how far away from home is Arnold? How are we supposed to narrow down where the MCM facility might be? With garbage, of course. No, I'm literally not kidding. There's just garbage thrown around the factory that might tell us where the MCM facility actually is. Throughout the factory, you'll find plenty of these garbage piles, many of them containing just paper. And in these paper piles, you'll find things like blank documents, order forms, and newspapers. These newspapers, clear as day, can be read as saying Geography of Arizona. For any non-US people watching, or US people who are just bad with their geography, Arizona is the southern bordering state to Utah. Now, you can't really make out a lot in the newspaper itself other than geography and geology, but it definitely feels weird for a local newspaper to be talking about your neighboring state's geography, right? Now, you might be asking why Scott and Steelwool would go through all the effort of moving us one state over just for this game in particular, and I think I might have found an answer. Now, at first, I thought this might have something to do with volcanic activity or something, because we do see giant pipes that are transferring what looks to be magma underground, and we do see lots of molten metal in the Dolly Hospital. After looking it up, it seems like Arizona has more volcanoes, but Utah has more active volcanoes. Many of Arizona's volcanoes lie dormant for the next hundreds to thousands of years, while Utah has a few more volcanoes than Arizona that are actually spitting something up. And I'm definitely no expert when it comes to mining volcanic material, but I feel like if you need something that's coming from the volcano, you need your volcano to be active. So then why exactly Arizona of all places? Well, I started looking into different natural phenomena in the area, specifically one that is mentioned in a different FNAF game: earthquakes. In FNAF Ruin, when we first enter the building, we can find newspapers that say that the destruction of the Pizzaplex was caused by an earthquake. This led me to think that maybe we needed to start looking at earthquakes rather than volcanoes, because if both states have volcanoes, maybe one of the states has less frequent earthquakes. Turns out, Arizona has less earthquakes than most of its neighboring states, including Utah. Without even realizing it, most likely, Edward's father was really smart for choosing Arizona. I mean, it would be a lot harder to build and maintain these giant pipes full of molten material if they had to worry about an earthquake every other week. Now, I feel it's important to mention, because if I didn't, I'd get roasted over fire for excluding evidence because it better fits my theory, that there's also another newspaper that you can find in this pile that is titled Senate Corruption. And after looking into it, I found something really interesting from the real world that this could be referencing. After searching the keywords Arizona Senate Corruption 1979, I found a file where Senate members were talking over making laws saying that bribery was illegal. Not only that, but also specifically defining what bribery is, along with what the punishments for bribery would be. And what's even more interesting about this document is that there's an attachment on it showing that Arizona was one of the first few states to actually have an outline of how bribery would be illegal. And the date on that attachment, February of 1979. This just feels like one big coincidence, right? I mean, there's no way that Steele, Wool, and Scott actually looked into US history in order to try and figure out how that was going to affect the lore, right? But what if I told you that Seeker the Mimic is actually backing this up, and not just from garbage that's lying around on the ground? In the parade float room, we can find a whiteboard that's going over some of the MCM parade float projects, and one of the parade float names stands out to me. And it's not Fazbear Entertainment, their name is literally said all over this facility. I'm talking about City Council. Using this whiteboard along with the real-life Senate documents and what prototype Mr. Helpful says on the way to Edwin's house about MCM only having one current project, I think Edwin might have been in cahoots with the local government. So why exactly would Edwin be bribing the government? That sounds ridiculous, right? Well, simply, I just think he doesn't have the correct permits to be doing whatever this is. Mining volcanic material sounds highly dangerous and something that the government would absolutely be poking their nose into. But if instead he could go around all that paperwork by, doing a few favors to the local government, I don't see why he wouldn't do that. I mean, he does that with all of his machines. Instead of doing the smart thing with his inventions and testing them in the factory, he instead does the faster and easier thing of just packaging them up and sending them off into the public in order for them to figure out all the problems. Why wouldn't he do the same thing with the government? Take the easy way out and just bribe them to look the other way while he does something kind of illegal. Why pay the money for a permit and wait for them to get back to you on it when you could just tell them to look the other way by giving them copy machines and coat racks and entire parade floats for their local parades? But this also gives us more context to one of the most mysterious minigames that we have in FNAF, Midnight Motorist. In this game, we're playing as someone who is speeding down the highway at up to 200 miles an hour while trying to reach the very end of the game or pulling off the road and entering later that night. Now, because of the Midnight Motor car that we get in 5 Laps at Freddy's, we can safely assume that the driver of this car is William Afton, and he's driving away from a Freddy's location in 1987 due to the fact that we have the fuzzy dice hanging from his rearview mirror. That pretty much just leaves why William would be driving so fast down the highway. I mean, sure, he needs to get home quickly enough in order to craft an alibi so the police don't suspect him, but 200 miles an hour seems excessive, especially if the pizzeria is literally in the same town that you live in. But what if that's where we're wrong? What if William doesn't live in Hurricane, Utah during the events of Midnight Motorist? Well, in Seeker the Mimic, we find half of a message from William to Edwin saying that he now owns all of the land that MCM owned, including Edwin's family home. Now, am I saying that that house on the hill at the very beginning of the game eventually becomes William's house? Well, we do know from FNAF 4 that William eventually does live in a house on a hill, and we see that same house again in The Curse of Dreadbear, implying that this house is still important. Now, the biggest problem that I had with this going into it was thinking that William was going to have to make the 2+ hour drive every day in order to get any work done at Freddy's. But then I realized that William doesn't need to start living there in 1979. In fact, the games tell us that he doesn't. In FNAF 4, we see that the Aftons live right next to Fredbear's family diner, literally within walking distance. But sometime after the bite and Fredbear's closes, William moves his entire family to a completely different house, the one that we see in Midnight Motorist. And we know these are completely different houses because of their surroundings. The one in FNAF 4 is shown to be right next to Fredbear's Family Diner and a playground, while the one in Midnight Motorist is in the middle of the woods down a dirt road. And we know that Afton would be free to move his entire family to Arizona if Fredbear's closes because he's having other people run the Freddy's establishments. We see in a message that once he hires someone, he's going to give them a location to run themselves. And the crazy part, I think Scott has had this planned for years. Clearly not as planned out as it is now, but there's a detail in Midnight Motorist that has had theorists scratching their head for years. Now, there's one other building that we can find other than the house in Midnight Motorist, Junior's, a place that many have believed is some sort of bar that William went to earlier that night, got too drunk, and got kicked out of. But what if it was never a bar? What if instead this was Scott's earliest way of trying to tell us where all those new animatronics and new characters came from in Pizzeria Simulator? Through Secret of the Mimic, we learn a little bit about Edwin Murray's father and how he gave his son the MCM company. But what we don't learn about his father is his name. Or at the very least, you won't be finding his name while playing the game, because if you start going through the files of the game, you'll find the picture of Edwin's father in the files. And the file name of this picture is Edwin Sr., meaning that his son's full name is Edwin Murray Jr. Now, in FNAF 2, we learned that Fazbear Entertainment was keeping watch of any old employees trying to enter any of their property.
Hey, keep a close eye on things tonight, okay? From what I understand, the building is on lockdown. No one is allowed in or out, you know, especially concerning any previous employees.
And wouldn't you know it, but by the end of Secret of the Mimic, we find out that Fazbear Entertainment owns all of MCM through that little message from William Afton that we talked about earlier. And since Fazbear owns MCM and we see William isn't allowed into Junior's, I think this is Scott's way of trying to tell us that Junior's was an early draft of what MCM became. Wow, that was a lot to cover. Anyway, I'm gonna leave this video here. What do you guys think? Do you think MCM actually takes place in Arizona? And if so, does that actually give us any more context to Midnight Motorist? Leave your comments down below, and of course, if you liked what you saw, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to see more of my content in the future. Thanks for watching to the very end, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye!